Hello and welcome to Beyond the Bio. Keep listening this week to learn all about the benefits of having a podcast, how to get big stars onto your show, and the possibilities that podcasting can create in terms of monetization. This week, I am joined by Teresa Heath-Wareing, who is an online business marketing and mindset strategic coach who works with business owners from across the world, helping them to build a business and life they love. An international best-selling author, award-winning speaker and TEDx speaker, Teresa is the host of the Your Dream Business podcast and has interviewed the likes of Denise Duffield Thomas, Amy Porterfield, Pat Flynn, Michael Hyatt, Jasmine Star and Stu McLaren, amongst others. Teresa is recognised alongside some of the world's biggest digital marketing thought leaders and is widely regarded as one of the UK's leading marketing influencers. So let's get stuck in. It's great to have you on the show talking about all things podcasts. So you're up to episode 360, did you say?
As we record this, the episode that has just come out is 360, which blows my mind.
That is wild. And as I was saying to you earlier, I am a fairly recent listener of your show. So I reckon I've probably listened to about 30. So I've got loads to go back and listen to. And I really
sorry.
do.
I only apologise.
Enjoy it. No, I love it. And actually, there's something quite cool, isn't there, about when you discover a show that has been going for a while and you really like it and you can go back and you can binge it and you can get caught up on all of the back catalogue. How would you say that the show has evolved since you started it? Because is it different? You know, if I go back and listen to episode 1 to 10, will it feel different to episode 360?
Yeah, that's the very short answer. It has completely evolved. And I think that's something that's super interesting because when people start anything in business, they want it to be right and perfect and they want to hone it. But the truth is, you can't until you start. And obviously, I never started the podcast with the intention of changing it. The name has changed 2 times, right? So I've never stopped the podcast, but I've changed the name. So we've continued, kept adding to the episodes, but it has changed and it's tweaked and it's developed and it's grown with me because the person who started the podcast 360 episodes ago is a very different person to me today. And some of my opinions have changed. And some of the people I used to follow and love and be an advocate of have changed. And that it's really interesting because part of me wants to go back and delete and stop things or go back and go, I don't mean this anymore. But that's part of the journey. And it's not that like anything dramatic has changed. It's just the more I've learned, the longer I've been in business, the more I've understood, the more I've understood myself, the more my skills have developed in lots of other areas has meant that it's gone down different routes and it's different places and it'll probably change again, which I think hopefully is part of the good thing about it. So for the long listeners, that they've been able to follow me on this journey of doing the podcast and who I am and what I talk about.
And with some people, when they change the name of the show, they actually just kind of park the original show and start again. What are the benefits, if any, or what's been the rationale around changing the name but still continuing? Yeah.
So for me, it was more about, was the name matching up to what I was talking about? So that's why I didn't change or stop the podcast. Because so when I first started the podcast, it was called Social Media Marketing Made Simple, right? So 10 years ago, when I started my business, I'd been in marketing for 10 years prior to that anyway. But a lot of the stuff I did was really heavily focused on social media because 10 years ago, that was a real thing. And I talked a lot about it. So it made sense to call it Social Media Marketing Made Simple. And then as time continued to progress, I realized that I wasn't just talking about social media, far from it. I was talking about the online business world. So then I changed it to marketing that converts, right? Because that felt good. It felt like, no, this is more in line with what I'm talking about. So I didn't feel the need to actually stop or change because the podcast was already showing up that way. Just the name didn't match. So I changed the name to match it. And then I can't remember how many years ago it was now, but again, I had a big old rebrand, changed everything again. And because at that point I was speaking more generally about business and because I was doing a coaching qualification and I was being able to coach people in different areas and I would talk about team and I would talk about like building community and all these other various things, that then I changed it to Your Dream Business. And that is now what it stands at. And interestingly enough, I was speaking to someone the other week who was talking about podcasting, and they were saying that one of the big mistakes is that people make is the name. And I was like, okay, feel free to rip mine apart. And he was lovely. And he was like, listen, actually, with what you're saying you do, it makes sense. But he probably wouldn't have recommended it like straight off. You know what I mean? But when I justified it, he was like, yeah, that makes sense. But I was really open to go, I'll change it again. Like, I have no fear in that. And like I said, I think it's the fact that the podcast progressed and then I changed the name. I didn't suddenly go, do you know what? I'm going to do a whole new direction. If I had, I think I might have gone, let's stop and do a different one. But for me, that felt fine.
And has the frequency and the timing of the show changed during the time you've had it? Okay.
No, every single Monday an episode goes out. I've never missed a single week. And I have had some humongous things happen in my world, you know, some big, awful things that literally knock you off your feet. And the episodes that maybe have gone out, because I always try and be a bit ahead anyway. My interviews are always very much ahead, but my solos, I try not to do too far in advance because I feel a bit detached from it and I don't like that feeling. So my mum passed away very suddenly a number of years back, and the episode that went out was literally, this is what you do to keep going. And it was like 10 minutes long. And it basically said, I am just doing this to be consistent and show up, and I'll see you next week. And that was it. And it was fine. So, but never, ever missed a Monday, not one.
Wow, that is impressive, because what I find at the moment in particular is that everyone wants to do a podcast, or they're bringing a podcast out, or it certainly feels that way. And then they kind of get a bit bored maybe, or they realize that actually to do it well can take quite a bit of time, and then you see, you know, they stop after episode 4 or 5. And I think there's a friend of mine that talks about you only have to hit episode 6 to be in the top whatever percentage of podcasters. Which is wild. But obviously you've been doing it for quite some time now, so what have you found the benefits of having your own show to be?
Some of the really good benefits have been the relationships I've developed with people because they've been on the podcast, or because we have somehow connected through the podcast. So one of the stories that I get asked about a lot is my very first 2 interviews. So for the first 20 something episodes, I never interviewed. Okay. So I just did solos, and someone, I think it was either John Lee Dumas or Pat Flynn at the time, said, get really good at doing the show and then start interviewing. And then on episode 20 something, I did my first interviews, and my first 2 interviews were Pat Flynn and Amy Porterfield. And people are like, how on earth did you get Pat Flynn and Amy Porterfield as your
That's
first
one of my questions.
interviews? So for me, I developed that relationship. And then from that, some of the relationships that I've had and the credibility that I've had from interviews has been phenomenal. And now I get approached. So I just had Ryan Dice on not that long ago, the guy who founded Traffic and Conversion, and they approached me. Denise Duffield Thomas's team approached me. And I think that has been a massive credibility piece for me. Now, has that given me customers? No, not directly. Has that brought me more listeners? Nope, not directly. So those are super interesting things. But to put all those names next to me is awesome. The other thing I would say has been a huge benefit for my podcast is the fact of, one, the consistency. I can be relied upon. I have people come to my world and they'll say, I want to work with you. I'm not ready yet. And I can say, I'll be here. And I mean it, because I will be, because I've been sticking around 360 episodes. I don't ever imagine I'll stop or why I would stop at this point. So for me, the quality of, I am still rocking up doing this. I am not someone who just does something and then disappears. Like, I am going to continuously do this. I am someone you can rely on. Even when my world turns upside down, I am still steady when it comes to these things. So that's the other one. And then I get a lot of people who will say, I've been listening to your podcast for years and now I'm buying from you. So even though I do find it quite difficult to convert or to see the conversion in real time of someone listens, someone buys, I know that conversion happens. It just takes time.
It's that awareness piece in the background working away, and then when they're ready, they're coming. I like it.
Exactly.
So your show is consistently in the charts in several countries, which is amazing. Do you regularly review the analytics for your show? Because I geek out on this stuff. I love it.
See, I do love it. But also I find that sometimes it can have the adverse effect on me and it can dishearten me. So for a really long time, I never featured in the charts, right? And I would see other podcasts appear that certainly didn't have the listenership I had, certainly didn't have the reviews I had, certainly didn't have the number of episodes I had, and they would feature higher. And I used to get so flipping frustrated as like, why? What are they doing? What am I not doing? And then, completely out of nowhere, December of 2023, my podcast hit number one in the marketing charts for the UK. Literally out of nowhere, right? And funnily enough, Amy Porterfield messaged me going, "Oh my God, what happened? Did an episode pop off? Did you?" And I went, "Nothing." I literally looked at my downloads. Not a single thing has changed. So weird. And like I said, sometimes I can find it a bit disheartening that like you're not reaching high up in the charts, even though you're being consistent. And some people aren't consistent, and that's really frustrating. Or sometimes, like my podcast has constantly always grown, apart from weirdly, kind of in the last 12 months, where there's been some changes anyway, with like how Apple reports stuff and various other things. But my downloads have gone down, and I'm like, that's really frustrating. So weirdly, I've just had, I think it was July, it's just been my best month ever, which again is really odd because July and August normally, summer holidays in the UK, some holidays in the States, they tend to be a bit quieter because people aren't in their routine. So sometimes I love looking at the stats and I love looking at the numbers and I love seeing what my most popular episodes are. And I love seeing kind of who are the guests that people really love and resonate with. However, sometimes I have to go, it's not about that. And it's not about the numbers thing, because I think everybody wants the hundreds of thousands, millions of downloads. And don't get me wrong, you know, I want to hit 1 million. I think I'm at now just short of 400,000 downloads, I think.
I mean, that is impressive. I find the countries things quite interesting to see which countries you're in.
That's
it's just
hilarious.
so random.
You should see some of the countries I chart in. I am like, how? Where?
And
like,
who are these people?
Exactly. Why are they finding me? Like, it is really fascinating, really fascinating. But like I said, I love it and I hate it all at once, because I think as well, if you're doing a podcast, there are so many more things to it than just the numbers. And one thing I always try and liken it to is, you know, when someone says to me, I only get 100 downloads on a podcast, it's like, imagine 100 people around your house. That's a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a good
and you're having a very personal conversation with someone in their earbuds. Like, this is really intimate and it's long form content. You know, my episodes, if they're interviews, they normally go for like 45 minutes. If they're solos, they're probably 20 minutes, 30 minutes. That's a really long time for someone to engage in content. So actually it's not just about the numbers, but in saying that, one of my objectives this year is to improve and increase my downloads. So therefore I am watching the numbers to see if what I'm doing has any effect. And if it doesn't, we'll do something different. So that's why I would pay attention, not, oh, so-and-so is getting more downloads. Because this is the other thing, you have no idea what people are getting. No. And it's completely different for everybody. So that doesn't matter. The only thing I compete against is myself.
That sounds very sensible, very, very wise. There's different ways to monetize a podcast. Have you ever tried sort of monetizing yours? I know that we talked briefly about getting clients who have been listening to the show, so in some ways you could maybe do some number crunching around that, but have you ever explored sponsorship or anything like that, or adverts, whatever?
Yeah, so I've had a couple that I've done sponsorship with. I've never had a permanent sponsor of the podcast. It's funny, like, it's one of those things that I would toy with whether I like or don't like. And I like the money, thank you very much, but I don't necessarily love adverts in a podcast. I think it depends on how well you do it and who it is and that sort of thing. But I've had a few brands sponsor it, and some of the brands I work with pay really well. So therefore it kind of makes perfect sense for me to go, yes, I'll put an advert up for a week and get a chunk of money. Thank you very much. Whether that converts massively for them is another matter. Because one thing I do find is that with a podcast, getting someone to take action can be difficult. So really, any sponsorship I've done tends to be brand awareness rather than doing something like specific of click here and do this thing. The other thing that I'm finding is I am getting more and more people reach out to offer to sponsor the podcast. I put a pitch in. I didn't get the pitch. It would have been ginormous if I had, but I got asked to pitch for something a few weeks back, which was kind of cool for a really big brand. That didn't come off. But even the thought that I've been asked and I've been seen.
And how did that come about?
Literally, and see, I was about to say literally out of nowhere. It's not out of nowhere. It's because I show up consistently every single week and do a podcast. But they reached out to me, the company. So it was a huge brand, a household name, and their PR agency reached out to me and said, we have a budget, and it was like a budget of 100,000. It was ridiculous. Wow. We want to use it in some sponsorship. We're targeting, and it was my audience that they were targeting, which is brilliant. And basically, could I put in a whole pitch thing? So I put together this big, massive pitch doc about why me, why the podcast, what else I can do, and that sort of thing. And as it was, they came back and said they haven't chose me this time. But purely the fact that they found me and asked me was massive. And also I was able to say that I've worked with people like Adobe and they've sponsored the podcast. So that was really cool. Nice. To go, that is a big name that people know. So yeah, and it's funny because I listen to podcasts myself, but I was listening to Jenna Kutcher's and I've never listened to hers before. And she did a ton of adverts in really quick succession and they didn't fit. And it made me turn off, which I was really disappointed in. Like, I was like, oh, well, and great. She's making an absolute packet from that. And would I say no if it was offered to me? Probably not, like I'd have to think seriously about it. For me, it's very much about, is this a good fit? Personally, I want to know the company and work with the company and use their products. I'm anything I affiliate anyway, I have to know and love it. So I have been approached by some others that I don't use and I've kind of gone, I don't think this is going to be a good fit because I don't feel comfortable in going, hey, buy this thing that I've never bought. So yeah, I have made some money from it. The other thing that it's done, which has been amazing, is I got approached by Channel 4 and they have Channel 4 Ventures, which is their capital venture side of their Channel 4 arm. And basically they were launching a new project in it and they asked me to go along to their press day, which I've never been invited to before, and then do a whole interview with a series of business owners, huge business owners. The last one I'm waiting on is Nicky Wicks, which is Joe Wicks's brother, who runs the Body Coach with him. So that's super cool. And again, they found me because I have a podcast.
That is great. I love all the sort of weird magic that happens when things just appear seemingly out of nowhere, but obviously it is linked to the fact that you are showing up and you are doing all these cool things. I love it. You mentioned earlier that you have a mix-up between solo and guest episodes. Have you noticed a difference in performance of the episodes between guests and solo episodes?
No, not really. The only time I notice a difference is one of the best episodes that I've ever done and one of the highest downloaded episode is Jasmine Star's. And I did it before she had a podcast. So I think there's a couple of reasons why it was so good. One, you couldn't go and listen to her on a podcast because she hadn't got one. She now does have a podcast. Two, she shared it. She actually ended up sharing it before I shared it because we have it scheduled to go out and she had obviously woke up, had the email and shared it on Instagram straight away. So she actually probably did pull in people because if they wanted to listen to her on a podcast, they couldn't listen to her on her own. So unless they did something specifically about that, then no, I don't tend to see a big difference. And I really like the mix. I really like the conversation of an interview and the ability to learn new things. And obviously, I'm not an expert at everything, obviously. So I can bring in experts, which is brilliant. And I can act stupid and I can act a devil's advocate as well. So when someone's saying, this is a brilliant way to do it, I can go, why? And I really love that. And like I said, and I love the fact of the connections it's given me. But also what I like is the solos where I can get really in the weeds with stuff and I can really go, do this, do this, do this. And I can give them really actionable things in which they can do. In 2023, I actually only did solos. I got to a point, and we've got there again very quickly, where we get probably 2-3 applications a day for the podcast. A day. It's ridiculous.
That was going to be one of my questions. How often do you get pitched, and what do you look for in a great pitch?
Constantly pitched.
Wow.
So weirdly, there used to be a thing to say, if you want to be on the podcast, here's the form, what to do. And that was just getting too much, because what was happening, it was getting put straight into Asana. I was having to go through every single one. Now I've taken that down. People either come to me through my site, through my email, or DM or something like that. And then I say, you need to, well, so it depends how they come to me. Okay. So normally if they come through me on DM, I don't love it, but I'll then say, email this address. When they email the address, all of these get given to me. So I see them straight away and I make a very quick snap decision on them. And it's either yes, no, or maybe. So we get so many. And I just got to the point where that was almost a full-time job in itself, going through all those applications. And also the amount of stupid applications that I get. Like,
oh, I know.
They pay no attention. Like, they don't look at it. The problem is they see one person on there and think, oh yeah, this will be a great fit for my mate Jeff, who's an Amazon seller. And it's like, if you actually spent 2 minutes, you would know I wouldn't have someone on who talks about that and who looks like that or who is like this. So if you're going to pitch, give me a link. At the very least, give me a link to something where I can go and see that you exist for real. Tell me very briefly what you want to talk about and why you'd be a good fit for the podcast. And then give me a link to your Instagram, your website, your media page, whatever it might be, because I want to really quickly look at you and go, do I think you're a good fit or not? The people who just don't give me a link, it really irritates me. And already I'm on the back foot, because it's like, now I've got to go and search for you and see who you are and whether I think you'd be a good fit. Like I said, we then have templated emails almost that say,
thanks,
thank
but no
you,
thanks.
but no thanks. And the thing is, with anybody wanting to get on someone else's podcast, if you're not a good fit, you don't want to go on, because that is wasting your time as much as theirs. And I've done this before, where I've gone on and I've been interviewed for someone else's podcast, and I got into the interview and within minutes I thought, oh God, I do not like this guy. And it was a guy, and he did not line up with my values. And some of the people that he loved in the online space, I did not love. And he was very bro marketing. And I was like,
I thought you were going to say that.
Oh man, this is not for me. And I did the interview anyway, because obviously I was on it, I was doing it. And afterwards I thought, what an absolute waste, because anybody who loves him won't love me. I will not be a good fit for them. And therefore that will fall flat. So it'll be a waste of time. So yeah, so I look for that. I look for something that they've actually given me a link. I've looked that they actually have paid attention. So when they write me a good email, then I've responded to one just the other week, actually saying, normally I forward them straight to Johan, my assistant, but I wanted to respond because you've done a really nice job. Like, you caught my attention. You said some personal things. Another thing that goes down really well is write me a review. If you do a 5-star review, I am immediately going to go, I like you. And it's not to say that like that will definitely get you in, because it's not going to, but what it'll make me do is think nicer about you as I'm looking. And if you are a good fit, then I am more likely, because you've gone to that extra effort. So I'll go to a bit more effort to dig around and go, actually. So I think it's just about going to that bit of an extra effort, making sure that you are a really good fit, and going to the effort of saying, I know I'm a good fit. This is what I can do for you. This is why you want me on. And don't be put off by other people that they've had on. Like, it's really easy to look at that and think, oh, she'll never have me on. Well, no, I have to fill 20 something episodes a year of interviews, and I want good people.
And good
people
content.
don't always mean big people. And I have turned down some big people. Like, I've had some people contact me and I've gone, no, thank you, because they're not my people. So it's not just about the numbers. And I didn't like how they did business. So yeah, not just about how big they are.
So with those big names that you mentioned earlier, how did you get them on? Did you know them? Had you met them through some of the communities? Was that the in, or did you just write an awesome pitch that persuaded them?
So I'd met Amy at some events. So I'd been out to social media marketing world. If you've ever been to a big conference like that, once they finish their session, you can normally wait outside and then you can get to meet them, have a photo, all that sort of thing. Very fangirly. And basically I had met her through that. I think twice I'd met her. And I'd met Pat Flynn a couple of times, but I'd spoke on a stage. Pat Flynn was on before me. So we had actually spent a bit of time together in the green room and that sort of thing. Then he was being interviewed for something, and someone asked, how do you get big guests on? And he said, you need to build a relationship with them. Like, you can't just go in and be like, will you be on my podcast? You need to build a genuine relationship. So he said, what I would do is, out of event season, take him for a coffee. So I took him to his word, and I flew home from whatever event I was at, and I sent him a video DM in Instagram, and I did the same to Amy. And I said to them, I'm going to fly 5,500 miles to take you for a coffee. Will you meet me? Well, he couldn't say no, could he?
Oh,
Because I was
amazing.
about to fly 5,500 miles to
And
meet
did you
him.
really?
And I
do
did.
that? Oh,
and I
my
flew to
word.
the States, and I met Amy and I met Pat, both for a coffee. And
Did
that
you
was
in the same trip?
in the same trip, yeah. And I basically said, I'm going to come from this date till this date. Would you be able to meet me for an hour? And you know what the funny thing was? When I sent Amy's, and Amy didn't come up with a straight yes, she didn't come up with a straight no, but she was like, I need to have a look at my diary and all this. After I'd sent it, and as it was, we did then meet, I listened to the next episode of her podcast that had came out a few weeks prior, and it was titled something like 5 things I used to say yes to and now I say no. And one of them was meeting people
Coffee.
for a coffee.
Yeah.
Now, if I had listened to that, I wouldn't have sent that DM, right? And now I'm friends with Amy, and I was in Nashville in February and around her house. Like, you know, if I hadn't have taken that step, that would never have happened. So anyway, the idea was I'd meet him for a coffee. If we got on really well, then when I get back to the UK, I would message them and say, thank you. Is there any chance you would be a guest on my podcast? I didn't even have to wait. Both of them, and I met them obviously separately in the same trip, but an hour each. And Pat took me to his studio. We went out in his Tesla, which he was one of like the first people I knew had a Tesla. So that was cool. It was so cool. And then Amy was lovely, and my husband came along. She met my husband, and obviously now we're friends, and you know, it's just crazy. But anyway, while I was sat with both of them, they almost said it verbatim. I was talking about the podcast, and they were like, how are you getting on? I was like, yeah, good. I've not done any interviews yet. And they were like, why is that? And I said, well, to be honest, I'm a little bit scared about asking people. And both of them said, if I'm on your list, I'll do it 100%.
Amazing.
And I went, you are. Thank you. And they did. And then this is the key thing. Okay. So I worked really hard to get those two. Obviously, flew very far to go. I mean, they lived in San Diego. It wasn't the worst place to go. Do you know what I mean? But then what I did is I looked at Amy's circle, and I went from Amy to Jasmine and said, Jasmine, Amy's been on the podcast. Would you come on too?
Yeah, nice.
And Jasmine went, yes. And then I went to James. Would you come on? Because Jasmine and Amy have been on. Yes. Someone else. Will you come on? Because these people have been on. Yes. Like, and then I used all those connections. And then, like you said, I got to a point where I had all these huge people on that then other people start asking me, which is awesome.
I like it. I like it a lot. What other ways do you promote the show? Obviously, if you've got great guests on, hopefully they're going to promote it. But you know, what works or what has worked for you?
So, stupidly, even though I have an email list, I never told them about the podcast. So I now email every Monday with the podcast and tell everybody what is in the episode. And again, like I said, some of these things have been really recent. I think I woke up again kind of at the beginning of this year when it came to the podcast and refreshed myself and things which have helped. So I do that. I record a hook at the beginning of every episode, which I never used to do. And again, I had a summit at the beginning of the year, and I had some really cool podcast people on there, and they talked about that. And I was like, yeah, because he said people don't have a growth problem, they have a retention problem.
I heard that. That was on an episode that came out recently on your show, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I had another guy who said something really similar. So yeah, basically that, you know, if you could keep everybody that actually came along and listened, you would have a flipping amazing show, or everyone would have an amazing show. So now what I do is I record like literally a minute hook. So I wait till the episode's done, even if it's a solo, I wait till I finish, and then I will basically give them the sexy kind of rundown as to what they're going to get if they listen to it, or the kind of teasing thing. A little bit clickbait, but clickbait is only clickbait when you don't fulfill on
follow
the
through
thing. Yeah, and I follow through. So, but it's that whole, have you ever wondered, Well, today's episode, I tell you. So that kind of thing. I do a reel of that hook or something similar, which goes out every Monday, which is just me. And then if it's an interview on a Thursday, we post the video split screen of me and the interviewee. But again, this is something that I am constantly reviewing and constantly looking from. And at the point we talk about this at the moment, I'm about to start YouTube, which has been a thing for me, which I have not done. And obviously I've got 360 episodes and never done a YouTube video of them, because there is more reports and things coming out that actually, because YouTube is discoverable and podcasts aren't, that even by putting something on YouTube, you will increase your downloads of the podcast. So that's the next thing. So the team and I are currently working out the logistics of it. And then hopefully September 2024 will be when it starts.
Awesome. Well, it's been so great speaking to you, because I've been able to ask you all the questions about podcasts that I want to know, being sort of earlier on in my journey. So you've given me a few things to think about, which is awesome. Obviously, we'll put a link to your show in the show notes. In terms of people wanting to connect with you, where's the best place for them to find you?
So please do, if you're listening to this, I'd love you to come and say hi. So Instagram is my favorite. So if you just search Teresa Heath-Wareing, the advantage of having a long and unusual name, you will find me over there. And yeah, just drop me a DM.
Cool. We'll pop a link to your Instagram as well, so that it makes it really easy for everyone to find you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sophie. It's been brilliant.
Thank you for listening. If you're serious about growing your profile, take our free profile assessment quiz to see where you're at right now and get hints and tips on how to improve your score. You'll find the link to the quiz in the show notes. If you've enjoyed the episode, it would be mint if you'd subscribe, like, and leave a review. See you next Monday.